Welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today, we're going to talk about technology counterparty risk. And I'd like to welcome back for his third appearance on the show, Tim O'Hara, Vice President of Data Risk at Hack Ninja. Tim, welcome back.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome back, all.
Now, as I said, we're going to talk about technology counterparty risk. Now, I don't think a lot of people have heard that term before. So, what is it? Can you define it?
Sure. It's basically it's basically the risk that um, your business counterparties, these are your clients, your vendors, that they have contracted relationships, and those contracted relationships will fail, causing them to fail, impacting you.
So in effect, if you and I have a working relationship together, it's me looking at who you deal with beyond that, or is it you who has to deal with that and then validate to me? How does it
Yeah,
work?
yeah. Well, the way I like to say is if I'm out, if I if I'm outsourcing a business activity to you and a significant part of your process is outsourced to a third party, right? It's your responsibility. Well, theoretically, it's your responsibility to know what they're doing and how many outsourced activities they have, which
Mhm.
could lead to a failure that could come and impact me because um it's impossible for me to know everything that's in your tech stack. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At a point, you know what I mean? Like or any process stack. You know what I mean? It doesn't even have to be just tech, it could be processes, right? Because this could not only be that, it could be a phone system at a call center goes down. And you can't, and if it doesn't have to be just data processing.
So how do you go about identifying what these other uh, counterparties are, because a lot of times, if I'm approaching Tim, I'm contracted to you, you provide me a service. Um, who are you dealing with behind, that provides you this? A lot of times, Tim or the organization doesn't want to divulge who they're dealing with. So how do you go about managing that?
Um, yeah, what, and you probably aren't, they're probably not going to tell you, but this is where you can negotiate some things in your contractual language about, you know, um, you know, service levels, right? Just make sure that you negotiate good service level agreement language. Um, and that the other thing is that you have another arrangement in place that you can cut to pretty quick. Like, don't wait until your primary fails to look for a secondary.
Do you have to have something signed as a secondary, or is it more of if here in Canada, if Bell Canada goes down, we know we've got the 1-800 number for Rogers and we call them right away. That type.
Yeah. Well, depending on the criticality of the service,
Mm,
you might want to, I mean, like that's a risk management decision of a business, right? So if if you can't make dollar one if your phones aren't on, you know what I mean? Maybe having a secondary relationship of some sort makes sense that you can scale up. Maybe there's something small you could have in place that you could scale up and do a switch over if necessary.
what if you find out you're not thrilled, shall we say, with one of the counterparties that your main client is dealing with? You find out, wait a minute, we don't like Alex. We've had terrible time with Alex, and he's providing you all this information, and we're contracted with you. How do you manage those kind of things?
Yeah,
What
you
do you do?
probably, I mean, yeah, your best leverage is. probably is more saying, if the situation doesn't change, we're going with another quarterback. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, because you can't force a company to change its process, right? Unless well, depending on how much influence, right? You're, I mean, you're saying if things are continuing to happen the way they are, um, I'd probably just got to go elsewhere. I mean, that's probably your biggest leverage.
Well, right now, we're in a global conflict, really, because everybody's up in arms about what's happening around the world right now.
Hmm.
How do you go about what what would you actually do to find out who your main vendors are dealing with to make sure that there isn't a greater level of risk, behind the curtains that you're unaware of that they don't want to
Yeah,
tell you about? What can we
yeah,
actually do?
yeah. As far as what you can, yeah, you can ask them. You can ask them about, do they have service providers in certain countries? Maybe that might be high risk. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or to you can ask them, um, I would also say you would want to, um, you probably, this is a big ocean that we're talking about here, and you can't do it all at once, right? But if you use the 80/20 rule, you know, 20% of this has 80% of the risk, maybe, start to go work that way, right? But yeah, are there, um, are there particular activities more susceptible to cyber risk? You know what I mean? Again, this is where getting the company's industry and all the, what I mean, who their clients are, if they have governmental clients, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This this is where the industry and all of and where they're located and who all they're doing business with. It's a combination of those things. But I would just say, you know, are you um how you could ask them about, changes that significant changes they're making. You know what I mean? They're probably communicating those to you. What is your testing process? You know what I mean? You can ask them about their security protocols. Yeah, do they give you a SOC 2? Yeah, you know what I mean? Or and how much penetration testing they do, how frequently they do penetration testing. You know, how how important is quality to them?
So you're kind of assessing them, like you can send them assessments. So you just kind of send a bunch of questions to them that they need to provide responses back to you,
Hmm.
and then
Right.
you
Yeah.
assess those
Scores.
responses
You're
and
you're
score them.
scoring that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of, yeah, companies will use ER, like, yeah, some types of ERM, right? Enterprise, yeah, I mean, right. And so based on what the spend is, with the vendor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or based on the relationship, you know what I mean, and the significance of it, you know, because if it's a client, um, a credit risk could be a problem. You know what I mean? Right? And I was talking, so um a banker that I know recently had to write off a loan because a client of theirs had a ransomware loss, and um it they'd had two in a year and a half, and it messed up their cash flow to the point where they had to declare bankruptcy. So
Hmm.
this is where a third party, you know what I mean? So it's it's not an easy thing to manage, I will admit. You know what I mean? And there's different aspects of it, but it's something that I'm seeing. more. And so as you're entering new business relationships, if you're, I was talking to now this banker saying on loans that are riskier, they're going to require cyber insurance as well as key person insurance. That's an example. Like it's not always things that we provide, but it's just what is the risk in this transaction or this relationship, and how can we mitigate it to make our outcomes better?
Now, I want to circle back to something we talked about in our first episode, where we talked about change in communication with your third parties and things like that, that's where a lot of the breakdown occurs. So, how do you manage that with your third parties?
Yeah. Well, yeah, sure. Well, communication is, you know, there's, phone, email, right? The different forms, right? You want to make sure you're operating on secured connections, right? That you keep up with the changes in the people, right? In people or their products and services, right? Um, and that you're not only doing that, but you're scaling for the future and planning for the future, which is quantum is coming, and the encryption that um, that c- companies use today won't work with a quantum environment. So how are you planning? You know what I mean? How are we doing what we're doing, and how are we gonna, when that hits, how are we gonna how are we gonna be ready? You know,
Yeah,
so um and yeah, and as like I said, the communication can be, it's not only you want to make sure that you know that what you're getting is what you expect when you expect to. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, because again, people are, talking about these, I call them, email fire drills, you know? Um, and we mentioned that a little bit earlier, but the point is, one of the drivers for them is when people put out of office notification, I'm out of office. Oh, that's a trigger for, oh, let me go through this person's email account and see what kind of havoc I can start.
yeah. But I was thinking too that the better relationship through change and communications that, let's say, you and I have, the better it may be to assess the counterparties, right?
Oh, oh
Because
no,
we've
absolutely.
got
Yeah.
established, but not taking it for granted because change is going to happen between you and I as well.
No, you're right. Yeah, the more trust there is, the more you can leverage, right? If we all have the same outcome in as our goal, right? Okay, where are places, where are holes in our strategy, right? Strategy, process, operations, and technology. I call it SPOT, but basically, where are holes in that where we can do something differently.
Any final thoughts on technology counterparty risk?
It's something where you don't know what's going to hit you, right? And so just again, it's thinking about those, what's the frequency of, what's the magnet? These are more magnitude issues. You know what I mean? When, um, and it's really about how can we plan for it so we can recover as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again, Tim. I really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with us.
Thanks. Thanks all. Thanks, Alex.